how many of you are getting ready to go off to college? Raise your hand, you're going off to college. We'll pray for some of you here at the very end. Go, if you would, to Psalms 29. I've gone through about, thank you, Psalms 29. And, I've kind of gone through about 5 different messages while I've been worshiping, but trying to, give you the right word. And hopefully this is it. I was at a camp. I do 2 of my own camps. In fact, next year will be my 20th year to do my own personal camps. We rent a campground, and this year we had almost 1,400 at 2 different camps. And one of these days, the only thing, I've done about all that you can do, but I would love one day to speak one time at Falls Creek. Haven't gotten that opportunity, so if you guys would pray for that, I would love one day. I know I'd mess up a lot of people, but it would be a whole lot of fun. It would be, I'm telling you, if they can have some of these pastors all decked out, they ought to be able to have this old man right here. I was sitting in the auditorium, and a lady came up to me with a young girl, and I believe her name was Nikki, and I could tell somebody did a bad haircut job. She actually cut her own hair before she came to camp. It didn't look all that bad, but I could tell it wasn't all even. I thought a pretty little girl, and what had happened was they brought her to me because they found a note. It was about the 3rd night of camp, and they found a note on her bed, and the note said, when you find this, I'm going to be dead. This is at camp. And at this point, we got 700 kids at this camp. But what I noticed in the note, and why I didn't panic, was in the middle of the note, she says, I really need help. I need help. Very few suicide notes will ever put that in there. They won't put, I need help. Now, they're definitely needing help, but she made it pretty clear, and that was all that I saw in the middle of that letter. And so finally they found her. After a couple of hours, they found her. And she could have done something, but she didn't. And come to find out, her grandmother brought her to camp. Their church had been having struggles, and they came with just different parents, but they wanted to get to camp. The mom evidently was a drug addict. The dad was in prison. She's been abused. And she said, I just don't have any friends. I'm not athletic. I can't sing. I'm not very smart. And so she needed to hear the right voice. So I began to encourage her. I said, you know what, Nikki? I said, you're a pretty girl. I said, now I'm not going to ask you to cut my hair. And she started laughing. She said, well, do you think it looks bad? And I said, no, I think it looks pretty cool, but I'd get somebody to kind of finish it up for you. She laughed. I knew she needed to laugh. And I said, Nikki, there are, in fact, 2 of my summer staff. I have college students who apply, and they get to travel or be at my camps for a couple of weeks. And these 2 young ladies kind of took her in. And after a few moments, she just needed to hear the right voice to encourage her. Now, I want you to know, unlike most evangelists, I actually do care about people. I say that because they love the pulpit and they love preaching. They just don't like people. And I actually love people. And when I go to camp, I play dodgeball, and I get killed because I've got a mark on me. And I play basketball all day long. I'm out there with them. Because I feel like if they can listen to me preach, that I ought to be able to be out there with women. I think Jesus would do that. And so I'm out and among those people. And I'm constantly, and so Nikki, I got her phone number. I've been able to text her about 5 or 6 times since camp to our summer staff. And sometimes people just need to hear the right voice. So everybody say voices, say choices. I just want to read a few scriptures. Now, for you that are taking medicine, it's 6:48. And if you think we're going to be done at 7, your thinker is broke. I'm just telling you. Dude, you got the wrong thinker. Here it is. Psalms 29, when I pause, you'll know when to speak. Honor the Lord, you heavenly beings. Honor the Lord for his glory and strength. Honor the Lord for the glory of his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. When I pause, you'll speak. Verse 3, the of the Lord echoes above the sea. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty sea. The of the Lord is powerful. And then again, the voice of the Lord is majestic. Verse 5. The of the Lord splits the mighty cedars. Look at verse 7. The of the Lord strikes with bolts of lightning. Verse 8. The of the Lord makes the barren wilderness quake. And look at verse 9. The voice of the Lord twists mighty oaks. In verse 10. The Lord rules over the floodwaters. The Lord reigns as king forever. The Lord gives his people strength. The Lord blesses them with peace. Peace. Everybody say voices. Say choices. Go to Matthew chapter 7. Go quickly. Go to Matthew 7. And would you look at verse 24? Very familiar passage. If you've grown up in the church, which I didn't, and you guys have heard my story many, many times, but I always seem to hear the wrong voices. Voices of depression, and I was suicidal at 10. Voices of discouragement, voices of hate and rejection. Here it is. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Anyone who listens to my teaching, this is Jesus' words, and follows me is wise, like a person who builds a house on a solid rock. Though the rains come in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it's built on the rock. But everyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish. Like a person who builds a house on sand, and when the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Let's go back to verse 33. Though my parents get a divorce, though someone ends up with cancer, though a tornado comes through our city, though there's a car wreck, you can read it that way. Though those things come against you, here's the deal. I believe that God today is still speaking in our world. Everybody say voices, say choices. You know, when I was flying in to Oklahoma City last night, it was just a beautiful sunset. It was absolutely gorgeous. God speaks. Please listen to me. God speaks through his creation. Men, listen, he speaks through. I've been to Niagara Falls, and I was just amazed because my God did that. When I look at the stars and the moon, I want you to listen. My God did that. See, it concerns me because people say they don't hear God. Well, I'm going to tell you why in a moment, why you don't hear him. But the problem is God speaks through his word. Do you understand? And I wish I could show you this video. It was an incredible video. And this young lady starts off, she says, well, I'm sitting here on my bed. I've got my Bible. And now she said it a lot of funkier and a lot of cooler. I can't do it. But she said, I'm sitting here. And she says, laziness knocks at my door. And laziness says, are you just going to kind of read the scripture like you normally do? Just kind of read it, pray some little prayer and head off. So she began to talk a little more, and finally she said this. The next time laziness knocks on my door, I love her. She said, I'm going to just punch it right in the face. Listen to me, students, mom and dad, and this is what I've been telling people forever. This Bible ought to be your very best friend. This Bible is a marriage manual. Listen, it'll show you how to date. It'll show you how to live. It'll show you how to love. And the problem is we're not clinging to this book. You see, here's the bottom line. This Bible is the voice of God. And how are you going to hear God if you don't read his word? See, God speaks through prayer. I'm going to tell you, could you sense when we kind of began to pray for people, could you almost hear God speaking to us? I watched some of the people that you were praying for, and as you prayed, are you ready? God's voice was speaking through you. Everybody say voices. Say choices. Turn, if you would, quickly. Go to John chapter 10. I want to get to my one story. Go to John chapter 10. Oh, by the way, this morning, even though I read that scripture out of Hebrews, which I thought was still good, if you just write this down and look at it later. It's Hebrews 5, verse 8, when we were talking about obedience. And here's what it says in Hebrews 5:8. Go ahead and turn, if you would, to the book of John, chapter 10. But here's Hebrews 5:8. Even though Jesus was God's son, students, listen to this. He learned obedience from the things that he suffered. In this way, God qualified him as a perfect high priest for us, and he became the source of eternal salvation. Listen to this one, Nathan. For all who obey him. Listen to me. Salvation is an easy thing to do. I don't think the ladies back then, I don't know. She had funky looking hair. I loved her hair. She was here this morning. First time she was saved this morning. And I could tell. And by the way, several of these people that came up, I could tell that they heard God's. Guys, he's speaking today. He speaks to people. He speaks to his creation. I was at the Grand Canyon. Anybody ever been to Grand Canyon? Most incredible thing, I'm telling you. The biggest old stinking hole in the world. We're all just looking at it. Look at that hole. And my boys, Jeremy was probably, I don't know how old Jeremy was, but I know he was really young, probably 8 or 9, maybe 10. And my other son was a little bit older than that. We were standing there, and there was hundreds of people, and we're looking at this hole. And I'll never forget this. And finally, I leaned over to one of my boys, and I said, my daddy made that. The guy next to me said, dude, who's your daddy? My oldest son said, watch this. I said, well, my daddy is Jesus. And his father, God, made that for us. The dude looked at his family and said, we're just going to move down right there. Just look. But I want you to listen. Guys, every day, God, if you're not hearing God, maybe, just maybe, you don't know him. Say voices. Say choices. Now go to John chapter 10. Here we go. Look at verse 1. If you have the red letter edition, this is Jesus' words. And I know I've probably shared this, but this has been on my heart all day. Here it is. He says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate or the door must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. You see, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his. Keep going. They come to him. He calls his own sheep out by name and leads them out. Verse 4. After he's gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they recognize his. There was a lady that, and you would know her, that lived with me and my wife. We've tried to help her, and I won't mention her name now. And we've tried our best to help her every which way we could. And just recently, just a few months ago, found out she was going through when we weren't there, she was going through our house. She actually stayed at my mother-in-law's. And we were robbed, I mean, horribly. I'm just telling you, I can't even imagine when I found out it was her. And I'm going to tell you why she did it. Are you ready? Because she was listening to the wrong voice. You see, there's all kinds of voices in our life. Voices of discouragement, voices of worry, voices of hate, voices of guilt, voices of shame. That little Nikki that sat in that chair next to me, you could just see that she was listening to the wrong. You've got family and friends. Are you ready? You may be the only voice of God that they hear. And every day we've got to be a better voice. Keep reading. Look what he says in verse 6. In fact, verse 5. They will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run from him because they don't recognize a stranger's. Those who heard this, use this illustration, Jesus, they didn't understand what he meant. So he explained it. He said, I tell you the truth, I'm the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Verse 9. Yes, I am the gate. Watch this. They will come. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. But look at verse 10. The thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. You've heard this. But my purpose is to give life and life more abundantly, or give a rich, satisfying life. read on with me in verse, I keep reading. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for his sheep. A hired hand will run when he sees a wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him, and he isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. Verse 13. The hired hand runs away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they, underline this, young people, mom and dad, and they know me. Just as my Father knows me, I know the Father, so I sacrifice my life for the sheep. Verse 16, I have other sheep too that are not in the sheepfold. I must bring them, and so that they will listen to and there will be one flock with one shepherd. Go, if you would, to verse 28. Look at verse 20, verse 28, look at it. And it says verse 26, my bad. But you don't believe me because you're not my sheep. My sheep listen to I know them and they follow me. And look at the good news, young people, mom, dad. I give them eternal life and they will never perish. No one can snatch them from the Father's hand. I'm telling you, we got some churches giving some Fruit Loop stuff. Now I know what my son believes, and he knows the word probably even better than I, and I want you to listen to me. You need to make sure, and we're going to look at one story in the Bible. You need to make sure that you're a sheep tonight. Everybody say sheep, say goats. If you read Matthew 25, look at it later, but in Matthew 25, there's going to be a great judgment. He's going to separate the sheep from the saved from the righteous from the unrighteous. If you're listening, say I am. So you need to understand this. If you don't hear God, and I hear people, well, I just don't understand the Bible. Really? Here's the bottom line. I don't understand some of it either, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you, there's a lot of it that I do understand. Psalms, just take a journey through Psalms. James, 5 chapters. You guys are getting ready to go through the book of Hebrews, an incredible journey. And this is the bottom line. In fact, let me tell you to write this down. Are you ready? I just came across, and maybe you already have it. And if you don't, if I had enough money in fact, I gave all of my summer staff one of these journals. In fact, at our church, I promoted this. We have sold over 600 of these journals at our church. I came across the journal called Jesus Calling. If anybody have that journal? Let me just say this to you right now. Young people, they've got little books, but I get the leather one. It's a leather one. I mean, it's about that thick, looks like a Bible. It's the most incredible journal that I've ever come across in my life. And I'm telling you, ever since May, when I started reading it, somebody gave it to me, I'm just telling you, Nathan, almost every day when I read it, even today's as I read it, it was like Jesus is talking to me. It's called Jesus Calling by Sarah Young. By Sarah Young. In fact, I was in Hollis and I was promoting that. You know what they did in Hollis? They took orders and they went online. They're normally about $24 a piece. They got them for about, I think, $10 or $11. They ordered maybe 60 or 70 of them. Everybody, and I'm just telling you this, if you get that journal in your life and every day, can I go ahead and tell you, it's God's voice. See, God's speaking today. Everybody say sheep. Say goats. Now you have to understand this, that goats don't need anybody, but sheep can't live without everybody say shepherd. I meet people, well, I don't think you ought to go to church. I don't think you got to be a Christian to go to church. Can I go ahead and tell you? I agree with that. But can I go ahead and tell you? I think if you're a Christian, you ought to want to go to church. Hello? I don't think you got to go to a basketball court to play basketball, but it wouldn't hurt. I mean, you can try to play basketball on hockey deals. That ought to be fun. And see, here's the bottom line. I meet people who say they're a sheep. Can I tell you 3 qualities about a sheep? You ought to write it down. Sheep know God, sheep hear God, and sheep follow God. I'm going to say it again. According to John 10, sheep hear God, they know God, and they follow God. See, I meet too many people who say they're a sheep, but they don't even act like they know God. Young people, I challenge you, wear your Jesus shirts to school. The first day of school, I know girls, you're gonna go through 4 outfits trying to figure out what you're gonna wear. Let me make it easy for you. Wear a pair of jeans, shorts, and a Jesus shirt. You're done. Girls, say thank you. I just helped you with all that problem. I solved it. Now here's the deal. At school, you've got to, because I'm telling you, in schools, in our jobs, in our world, there's a voice of discouragement, there's a voice of pride, there's a voice of hate, there's a voice of rejection. We've got to be a stronger voice. Everybody say sheep, say goats, say voices, say choices. I mean, all through my life, I heard the wrong voices. October of 1968, this may not mean a lot to you. It was on a Wednesday night. This dude got me to go to church. You've heard my story. And I can honestly tell you, as that preacher, who by the way is dying with cancer today, Freddie Gage, his funeral is that at any point it's gonna happen. That dude, his voice, I'll never forget it. I mean, it was a rough voice. He had no jokes. There was nothing funny. I mean, at least I got a couple of funnies. He had nothing. But that dude's voice, it was almost like God speaking only to me. Say voices, say choices, say sheep. Hear God, knows God, and follows God. So if you claim to be a sheep, are you ready? You know him in an intimate way. If you claim to be a sheep, you follow God every day. If you claim to be a sheep, oh, by the way, the reason people don't want to go to church, they either don't like the shepherd, I like this, or they don't like the sheep food. Guys, this Bible is the voice of God. If you want to hear him, and I know I've heard people go, well, and I don't know that you're ever gonna, anybody here ever heard God's voice in an audible voice? Anybody here? I'm afraid to ask. Can I go ahead and tell you? I don't know that we need that today. Why? This is his voice. Man, if I'm driving 65 miles an hour, all of a sudden God says, Freeman, I'm gonna have a wreck. But can I go ahead and tell you? Every day God speaks to my heart. Man, through prayer, through other people, especially through his word. Now, go quickly. Go, if you would, to Luke chapter 23, and we'll be done. Here it is. I want to show you what happens when you listen to the wrong voice. Very simple story, and here it is. Voices and choices. Luke chapter 23, verse 1. Here it is. The entire council took Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. They began to state their case. This man's been leading our people astray by telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government by claiming that he was the Messiah. Look at verse 3. So Pilate asked him, are you the king of Jews? And look what Jesus said. You have said it. Then Pilate turned to the leading priest and the crowd. Everybody say multitude. When you see the word multitude or crowd, here, let me give you the picture. A multitude was at least 4,000 or 5,000. Remember when he fed the 4,000 or 5,000? That was men. That's not counting the women and children. So probably that day when Jesus was being crucified or when Jesus was being on trial, there were probably about 10 or more thousand people there shouting horrible things to Jesus Christ. So read on with me. 3 times you're going to see this. Here's the first one. He said to the leading priest and to the 10,000 or more, I find nothing wrong with this man. They began to be insistent. Verse 8. Oh, he is a Galilean, Pilate said. When they said that he was, Pilate sent him to Herod. Watch this. And then go to verse 8. Herod was delighted at the opportunity to see Jesus because he had heard about him and had been hoping for a long time to see him perform a miracle. He asked Jesus question after question, but Jesus refused to answer. Meanwhile, the leading priest and the teachers of the religious law shouted their accusations. Then Herod and his soldiers began mocking, ridiculing Jesus. Finally, they put a royal robe on him. They sent him back to Pilate. And look, young people, look at verse 12. Mom and Dad, Herod and Pilate, who had been enemies before, that day became friends. Here's the deal, and I know you know the story. Pilate wanted to do the right thing, and he tried his best to keep himself clean from it. In fact, keep reading with me. Look at the second time. Look, if you would, at verse 13. Then Pilate called together the leading priests, the other religious leaders, along with the people. He announced to them, he said, "You brought this man to me, accusing him of leading a revolt. I've examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence, and I find him innocent." That's number 2. Herod came to the same conclusion and sent him back to us, as you can see. Nothing this man done calls for the death penalty. So I will have him flogged, and then I'll release him. Verse 18. Then a mighty roar rose from the crowd. And with one, everybody say voice. And with one, I want us to sound really strong. And with one, voice. And with one, voice. Stronger. And with one, voice. Watch this. And with one voice, they shouted, "Kill him, crucify him, and release for us Barabbas." Look, if you, by the way, I like telling this because I think this is a picture of where we are in America today, in our world today. Barabbas, whatever you could do wrong, Barabbas did it. In fact, if you remember The Passion of Christ, if you saw that movie, raise your hand. You ought to watch it again. When they brought Barabbas out, he was all chained up. And they're holding him because if they would have let him go, the dude was going to run. But when they brought Jesus out, he wasn't trying to run. And here's what the crowd said, young people. "We want Barabbas, crucify Jesus." Here's what they were saying. "We want pornography. We want gambling. We want drugs. We want the abortions. We want hate." That's how you got to read it. But they didn't want love. They didn't want life. They didn't want truth. And I'm telling you today, that's where we are today. There are more, and I use the word loosely, Christians that now believe that it's okay to have a same-sex marriage. Look at me. That's what Barabbas represented. That's not, I want you to listen to me. The bottom line is this. We want alcohol, we want drugs, and you need to understand this. They were young, they wanted this to be set free, but they wanted the love and the truth and the life of God to be crucified. If you're listening, say I am. How many here have ever wanted to do the right thing, but you listened to the wrong voice? Raise your hand. You ever heard this voice? Nobody will ever see. You ever heard this one? Your parents will never find out. How many of y'all ever heard that one? How many of y'all your parents found out? When my boys were little, Jeremy was the one that I could get more so than my oldest son. I would come home off the trip, and we had a rule. If I heard that they did something wrong from anybody else but them, they got double spankings. It was bad. So sure enough, we'd get in the car, and I knew nothing. My oldest son got in the front, Jeremy got in the back. And I remember we were driving home from school. I picked him up and I said, "So who's going to tell me?" "I've already heard." I didn't know nothing. And Jeremy began to spill his guts. He said, "Well, Dad." And my oldest son said, "Jeremy, Dad knew nothing." But Jeremy was convinced that I knew something. If you're listening, say I am. Say voices. Say choices. Watch this. Go, if you would, to verse 20. Pilate argued with them. He wanted to release Jesus. Look at this. But they kept shouting, "Crucify him." And I normally yell here, but I won't. "Crucify him." And for the third time, and we're done. For the third time, he demanded, "Why? What crime has he committed? I find no reason to sentence him to death. So I will have him flogged and I'll release him." But read on. But the mob shouted even louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified. And watch this. And their voices prevailed. You know what scares me about our world today? Lost people have a bigger voice than we do. Did you hear me? the abortionist, I'm just telling you, the gambling, the whole, those people's voices are stronger than our, and it's about time that we become a bigger and a bolder voice for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.